Hello and welcome to another video where in this session we'll be examining the use of the journal to correct the errors within the accounting system. Historically, this has always been an area that people struggle on, so I thought let's make a video about it and hopefully it will start to fall into place. A journal is a tool used to record transactions that do not pass through the regular daybooks. It is regularly used to make accounting adjustments to the general ledger, but the part that we'll be focusing on specifically is how we use it to correct errors. Now, errors within the finance system are relatively common. Due to the human element of inputting data, it's impossible to ensure that no errors will occur. What this does mean is that when errors are spotted, we need to correct them within the finance system, and we do this through the use of a journal entry. Now, as a whole, people struggle on this topic, not because they don't understand how to use a journal, but because they're still struggling to fully grasp double entry bookkeeping, and it's hard to fix something that you can't put together in the first place. Now, this is completely understandable, because when first introduced to the world of double entry bookkeeping, it can often feel like you're learning another language. It takes time to feel 100% confident, and that won't happen overnight. With that said, I've tried to put together a 3-step process that will give you some structure to help you to better approach these questions in your exam. I would highly recommend that when following this process, you write the T accounts for transactions, because it will massively help visualize the process. So step 1 is to draw up the T accounts for the transaction as it should have been entered into the accounts. Step 2 will be to draw up the T accounts for the transaction and enter in what has actually happened. And step 3 is to calculate the entries required to get from what has happened to what should have happened. Let's take a look at a simple example to put this into practice. Fern was reviewing the monthly accounts when she came across a transaction for motor expenses that has been posted to motor vehicles in error. The posting was for £600 and all other entries were correct. Step 1 then, what should have happened? The entries to record this transaction should have been a debit within the motor expenses and a credit within the bank. Motor expenses, as the name suggests, being an expense, therefore a debit. As is its money being paid out of the bank, it would be entered in on the credit side. Step 2. Now let's look at what has actually happened. So rather than debiting the motor expenses account, the posting has accidentally been debited to the motor vehicles account, i.e. it's been entered into the incorrect account. The bank entry has been entered correctly. Step 3 then, going from what has happened to what should have happened. We can see on screen how the accounts look at present. To correct the error, we would credit the motor vehicles account for £600, and this would remove the incorrect entry and bring the balance back down to 0. We would then debit the motor expenses account for £600. The result of this is that we have a nil balance on the motor vehicles and a debit balance of £600 in the motor expenses and a credit of £600 in the bank, thus successfully correcting the error. How would this look in journal format then? The account names will generally run down the left-hand side and then the entries which you'd like to make on the right of them. In this example, our account names would be motor vehicles and motor expenses. We want to credit the motor vehicles and debit the motor expenses for £600. Remember, when completing a journal, the debits and credits must equal under the rules of double entry. Lastly, we just need to add in the detail of what the journal is for, so that if we come back to look at the transaction or somebody else in the team is looking at the entry, they know what it was for. We'll now move on to a second example to cover a slightly different scenario. Example 2. Tony was reviewing the monthly accounts when he came across a transaction for rental income where the double entry had been reversed in error. The posting was for £3,800 and both accounts used were correct. Step 1 then, enter what should have happened. The rental income should have been entered as a credit to the rental income account and a debit to the bank account. Step 2 then, enter what has actually happened. Within this scenario, the transactions have been posted in reverse. The rental income has therefore been entered in as a debit to the rental income account and a credit to the business bank account. Step 3, going from what has happened to what should have happened. Entering the correction in this case happens in 2 parts. This will always be the best way to approach an error where the transaction has been reversed. The first part is to remove the incorrect entry. To do this, we would credit the rental income account for £3,800 and debit the business bank account for £3,800. This brings the balance of both of these accounts back down to 0. Part 2 is to enter the transaction in as it should have been in the first place, which is to credit the rental income account for £3,800 and debit the bank for £3,800. You'll notice that this is the exact same entry as we've just made, but that's because the first entry removes the incorrect entry and the second entry enters in the transaction as it should have been entered originally. So how would this look as a journal? Part 1, debit the bank and credit rental income, removing the incorrect entries and bringing the account values down to 0. Then debit the bank and credit the rental income as the entry should have been made in the first place. And that wraps up part 1 of this journals and corrections tutorial. Within part 2, we'll be examining how to use the journal to correct errors when involving a suspense account. But for now, I hope you've enjoyed this video and found it useful. And if you have, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more AAT content. Thanks again for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.